Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, Partnering with Families in the Digital Learning Process, a Symbiotic Endeavor. My name is Miriam Alisa from the Center for Parent Information and Resources. Next. Okay, I'm gonna walk you through some Zoom features on how to use, you can use closed captioning. You can just click CC over there. It depends on your computer, but you will see the double over there. So caption, show captions. You can see it now. And we also have interpretation to Spanish. Tenemos un intérprete para español. Para acceder al canal en español, van a ver en la banda o cinta negra inferior un globo que indica interpretación. Interpretation. Haga clic allí, luego seleccionan español y oprimen donde dice Mute Original Audio. Esto último filtra completamente la señal en inglés para que puedan escuchar con claridad a nuestro intérprete Guillermo Cordero. Next. And the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Miriam. We're excited to be here. This is Christine Fox. I'm the project director of CITES at CAST, and I have a dream team here with me today. We're each going to introduce ourselves and tell you, of course, more about the project, and then specifically how you can have families engaged in conversations around inclusive technology practices. So my background started in the classroom. I was a curriculum coach, and I spent the bulk of my career so far in education technology. And so I hold the ed tech hat here in the CITES, and that's why we have a dream team where there's AT specialists and UDL specialists and leaders, and we are working together to ensure that all students have access to the technology tools and resources that they need. And I was privileged enough to work at the first inclusion school here in Palm Beach County. That's where I'm based out of. And that has launched my passion for supporting students with disabilities. Maggie?
Yeah, hi, my name is Maggie Pickett. I'm a certified speech language pathologist. So if that tells you anything about my background, I'm a special educator through and through. Partway through my career, I did turn into an AT specialist. That seems to be a familiar path for SLPs who are interested in assistive technology, working mostly with students with complex communication needs and supporting their augmentative and alternative communication. And I worked at the State Department of Education here in Iowa. We're actually dealing with an ice storm right now. So, and I see an old friend of mine in the audience. Hey, Deb. I'm really excited to be here with Christine and with Michelle. We've got really some awesome, important information to share. So thanks for having us. Michelle.
Awesome sauce. Hey, everybody. My name is Michelle Soriano, and I am a technical assistant specialist at CAST. But beyond that, my most important role that I've ever had was being a mom of 4 amazing kiddos, one of which receives special education services. And so although today I'm coming to you from CAST as a technical specialist, I'm also coming to you and I'm putting on my mom hat. I'm putting on the family hat because the struggle is real. And I want to make sure that as a parent, I'm voicing some of those concerns that I had as I went through the system with my kiddo. And so super excited to be here. Really excited to have some fun and to learn a lot of great stuff. Here we go.
Yes, and I just saw the note in the chat. We are going to try to, we are all fast talkers here. So we're going to try to talk slowly and clearly for the interpreter, which makes a lot of sense. Is probably best practice anyway. And agreed, it's great to have different hats here within our audience, and we'd love for you to share resources that then we can then disseminate as well, things from your centers or other organizations that may be helpful to leaders. So with that, I do want to highlight the fact that CAST is committed to accessibility through and through. And so therefore, we work to ensure that all of our resources. We typically use this as the POUR acronym, that they're perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And in that way, you can leverage the content, and we're going to share how you can access the slides as well as other content. All of the resources are free. They're free to you with your tax dollars at work. And so they can be reused and remixed because they're openly licensed as well. Another thing that we like to highlight is the fact that when we're thinking of individuals with disabilities, some use identity first, and that way they use their disability as their descriptor, and others leverage the language of people first. Here at CAST, we use people first language, so we would typically say something like a student who is deaf, and we like to acknowledge that and have you all think about, how you might include this type of language check in your practices.
All right, so that leads us to today's objectives. I'm getting really excited here. So today, the goal of this session is that we're going to identify family engagement best practices across the 5 framework areas of leadership, teaching, learning, assessment, and infrastructure. So you're really going to get to dig into the CITES framework. We're going to describe the essential nature of the 2-part symbiotic relationships between families and caregivers and educators, right? It's a partnership, right? We're equals. We work together on everything. And we are going to identify 2 resources from CITES that support implementation of the family engagement practices. So you're going to walk away with resources that will help you take this information and continue to use it throughout your journey. So now I've just shared some of our objectives for today, but in order for us to make this learning relevant, y'all, we want to know, what is it that you're hoping to get out of today's session? Now, you have a couple of options. When you think about your own personal learning goal, by the end of today, I'm hoping to learn this. You can either drop it into the chat, you can just personally reflect on it, or if you're watching this and engaging in this learning with somebody else, hey, go ahead and turn and tell them, hey, yo, I'm hoping to get this out of today. So we'll just take about a minute for you to be able to reflect on that. And as you're continuing to reflect on your goals, I'm going to go ahead and just walk us through our home-based document. Now, we call it home-based document because we keep on coming back here. This is exactly the document that houses all of our information. So we wanted to make sure there was a one-stop shop for all of the links that we're going to be utilizing, all of the information that we're going to be talking about, and an easy way for us to navigate through it. So if we can go ahead and pull up that home-based document really quickly, when you click on that link, it brings you to this document. And I already see there's tons of us already in there. Great. Notice that you have access to hyperlinked information about the logistics. You have our contact information in there in case you have any questions that come up after the session. You also have the slide deck. So if you are an individual who wants the slides in front of you and you take notes, that's me. Go ahead, feel free to click on that slide deck. You can download it, you can follow along with it. We want to make this as convenient and as easy to facilitate through as possible. And if there is a need that you have that we haven't captured on this one-stop shop, feel free to drop it in chat and we will do our best to make sure that we address that.
All right. So we are going to dig in now to the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems, CITES, and I'm going to give you a brief overview. Digging into CITES could be a whole day or half-day workshop, but we want to get all the way to the family engagement, the critical topic at hand today. And so with that, the purpose of this center, which is funded by the Office of Special Education at the U.S. Department of Education, is really to provide the opportunity to bring together IT, AT, EdTech to benefit students with disabilities. And so when we want to foster those inclusive technology systems, that means we're bringing together these leaders at the district level. So this is a systems change approach, and our primary target audience for CITES are district leaders, but of course, those leadership teams should be including members, family members from their districts, students, as well as leaders from the community as well. You can see the link to the website, and it's also in the home base document as well. Again, a variety of resources all available to you. So when we think about our current reality, and this is unfortunate even for the folks that have been working in this space for decades, for some, that assistive technology and instructional technology and leaders in the community are separated. So you see those different fun colored balls of clay, and everyone's helping students and they're passionate about their work, but they're doing this in silos. And our goal, as you can see from this gorgeous blended groups of colors of blocks here, is the fact that the collaboration in districts and among communities and across families is that all of the great information, all of the resources are being supported in a collaborative way. So things are moving forward. Folks are being proactive instead of reactive. And so that things are in time and just in time for students when they need it, and everybody's informed about the what and the why, and so those students can be supported as best possible. So this is our goal, and we know everyone's in a different place. The framework itself of CITES was developed based on the National Education Technology Plan that was last updated in 2017. It is actually currently under revision, and a new version will be launched in 2024. And we are inserting ourselves and also been invited to be a part of that process and that discussion, so that assistive technologies and accessibility is blended throughout the National Ed Tech Plan moving forward. And so we based the framework itself on the core content areas that the National Ed Tech Plan identified were critical for technology planning, and we believe also for inclusive technology planning. And those 4 areas are across the top of our website: leadership, infrastructure, teaching, learning, and assessment. And these probably are not a surprise to any of you, but when we think about, and my colleagues are really going to dig into families in just a few minutes, but we have family engagement spread throughout the areas of the framework. So it is not a standalone, it's not an afterthought, but it is really embedded throughout the framework itself. For each area of the framework, we have practices, so specific practices that we encourage districts to implement, as well as action steps where they can take on specific tasks to make sure those practices and inclusive practices happen. We have always resources. This is based off of research and lit reviews, and then we also have self-assessments available. So kind of like when you go to the doctor and you don't really want to get your cholesterol or your weight checked, but you need to. Similarly here, you can look at these different areas of the framework and say, how are we doing with leadership and inclusive technology? And sometimes it might be, yay, we're awesome, or hey, and making little tweaks. And then other times there might be areas of gaps where you can have continued plan of growth. The framework itself has been based off of a development process. So based on implementation science, we worked to develop this content, not as a standalone, but in partnership with districts across the country. The knowledge development districts, some of those are districts who are already doing some of these great things. And we highlight those with examples and vignettes and case stories throughout the site. Then we have 6 cohort districts that we have been working with for the last 3+ years. And they have really kind of stood by us, give us feedback. They also take the self-assessments at the beginning of a school year and at the end of a school year, and then they give us feedback on those as well. And we have evidence review based on literature. So it is not finished. Our grant runs through December of 2023. And from now through then, we will continue to revise, enhance the framework so that it is to the best place possible by end of summer, and then we will continue the dissemination. So you can learn more at the link that's on the slide if you really want to dig into, the development process itself.
Fantastic.
I'm going to turn it to our mom hat over here, over to Michelle and Maggie to truly dig into the family engagement portion of this work.
Thanks, Christine. So fantastic. And I love how Christine has really set us up to really look at how family engagement is embedded through all areas of the framework. And so we're going to look at, so we keep saying symbiotic, right? This word symbiotic, and y'all, that is a big word, right? Symbiosis. So if we were to break that down, basically all that means is that is the cooperative relationship. We go together, right? Families and education and the school, it is a partnership, and you can't have that partnership without equal parts. And so as we go through and as we dig into teaching and learning and assessment and infrastructure and all the different areas, know that we're going to be talking about the family perspective in that as well, because symbiosis, right? We're talking about that cooperative framework.
Sorry, getting slide happy here.
That's okay. It's great. You keep me rolling. I love it. Kiss your brain. All right. So because of the research that's been done, because everybody knows of the benefit of having that family engagement and making sure that families are a part of every decision, everything that's going on, our federal partners encourage it in law. And so here we have 2 different laws. It's the Every Student Succeeds Act, which you might hear it as ESSA. And then we also have IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And within each of these laws, it is encouraged, it is a requirement that we involve our families, that we involve that partnership in making these decisions. So as the mom in me says, mic drop, right? I am an equal part in this partnership. And the educator part in me says, oh, thank goodness, right? We can't do this without our families. So just know everything that we're talking about today is really all about how it's symbiosis.
That's perfect. And Michelle, sometimes I've heard the relationship of a parent and the education system described in more of a dyadic way, like just a 2-part back and forth. It's me and the school. And what we're learning within some of the research that we've done, Christine talked about that knowledge development, how we've developed this framework. We've been spending 2 years digging into this family engagement work. And what we're learning is that it's not, the title of this session could not be dyadic, like a dyadic relationship between families. And this graphic kind of helps us understand why. So I don't know any nerdy theory geeks out there, but some of you may have heard of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. Sometimes I like to challenge Michelle to say that in her free time just to make me giggle. But Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory is a theory that's widely used in our field, but also just in a variety of fields. But basically what it's speaking about is different levels of our systems that impact the person in the focus. And so the person in the focus in the case of education is the learner. And so what we've done is we've taken Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which traditionally has images or graphics of like Russian nesting dolls. We've taken that concept and we've CITESified it. So we've added our framework on top of it. And we've used the circles here to kind of illustrate. So I'm going to walk us through this so that we can start to understand it's a symbiotic relationship, and it's multiple relationships that need to be a cooperative relationship. So at the center, we have the learner. And then in the next layer within our system, within Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, is the microsystem. And from our CITES framework, those are really the things that are being operationalized in the classroom, the teaching and the assessment practices. What are educators, what are direct service providers, what are paraprofessionals doing in the classroom to support that teaching, learning, and that feedback cycle? Then we go to the next layer in the system, and that's the mesosystem. And in that system, it's really about the infrastructure. This is the what. This is the stuff. It's the technology, it's the assistive technology, it's the Chromebook, it might be an iPad, it's all of the things, it's the security policy, it's making sure that that our passwords are working, right? So it's all these pieces that really kind of feel removed from the classroom, but yet really directly impact a learner's ability or a family's ability to support the learner in that learning process if a barrier arises. So then the next layer is the leadership layer. That's the exosystem. And within our leadership, that's really about the decision makers. It's about the people in those positions who are saying, hey, here's something important that all of us are going to do, and the decisions that they're making and how those decisions impact everyone else in that cascade. And you'll notice that that learner is at the center. And each time we layer on a circle, each layer is impacting that learner in a different way. And so what we are trying to illustrate here is that symbiotic relationship, that cooperative relationship between educators and families is really multiple relationships. And so what does it look like, feel like, sound like to have symbiosis, a good cooperation that flows freely between educators, the educational system, and families when it comes to technology planning? And so that's what we're going to look at today. And that's what the research that we've done at the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems has been about. So we have this framework: leadership, infrastructure, teaching, learning, assessment. We did all kinds of literature reviews, as Christine said, and did all this work around what the practices are within the actual system itself. But what we know is that when families come into that system, there are barriers that present themselves in each area of this framework for families and for kids. And so what we learned is that instead of having these family practices that sit off in another area of a framework, these practices really have to be embedded across the framework, that we are engaging in decision-making and conversations with families around leadership, around infrastructure, around teaching, learning, and assessment practices. And so that's kind of what we want to share with you today to help us understand and help us gain some a common understanding, I guess, of what that symbiotic relationship should be in each area of this framework. So sit tight. We're going to hop in. And as Christine and Michelle said, Christine and I are kind of wearing our educator hats. We're both moms, but we're not moms who have worked through the system of and supported students being served on individualized education plans. So Michelle is going to be wearing that hat today. But knowing her, she'll sprinkle in her knowledge of UDL and her amazing educator hat too. So if you have any questions to this point, this would be a great time to kind of put them in the question and answer box. We're happy to address them, but we're also going to kind of keep rolling. So feel free to use that box. Ooh, and I did want to give a shout out. Glad we have this in here. So Dr. Angel Morgan actually helped us with research. So she helped us with the literature review, which is in that home-based document. You can go read that and some of the initial literature, dig into the literature that we did. But Angel, what she came to us and said after that lit review is like, we need more. We need to understand actually what's happening. And so what she did, she actually conducted a mixed methods research. And she partnered with us. She talked to, through survey, 326 family members of K-12 students, of family members of students with disabilities from across the US. Then we did some survey focus groups with those participants, with 10 of those participants, and really kind of dug into their stories and tried to understand what was happening. And so her literature, or her research, is amazing. We don't have it published yet. She has it published because she got her dissertation. She's now officially a doctor. But we just, everything that we've done, all these practices, really the foundational research that we're using is Angel's research. So big thanks to her and the work that she did there. Michelle?
Yeah, absolutely. And Maggie, there's a question in our Q&A that I think we should answer before we go into this one. And it's about that, the theory, the layers. And so do they overlap? Do they connect? They're wanting to make sure they have that understanding in their mind, clarifying that.
Good question. So if you think of, so Bronfenbrenner, when he has these images, they're nesting dolls. So they kind of, you've got the learner, and then behind there is the educator, so doing the teaching and learning, and then behind that one. So it's almost like they're resting on each other and they're all impacting each other. It's not necessarily a silo, although if you're not using something like the CITES framework to really support decision making, they can certainly become silos and the operating in ways that really don't support the learner. And in fact, in some ways, we'll talk in a little bit, actually really kind of create massive barriers for families and students. I'm not sure if that if that answered the question or not.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Maggie. All right. So we've already got a great start to our learning today. And now it's just time for us to engage in a little, what I like to call brain dumping. Okay. We're just going to brainstorm and share as a mom. So what you see on the screen here, there is a QR code and there's also a link, and we can, Christine just dropped that link in the chat. It takes you to a Jamboard. Now, a Jamboard is just, think of it like a whiteboard where you can just share your ideas out. And so Maggie's also showing us where it's located on our home-based document. Thanks, Maggie. And so you can grab on the left-hand side, you're going to see that there's a toolbar. If you can show them, Maggie, which one is the sticky notes? Think of these like electronic Post-it notes. As a mom, I could sit here and I could probably talk through many barriers that I experienced with my son as we went through our education journey together. We want to think about barriers specifically to implementing technology with students who receive special education services, students with disabilities, and their families. We are going to leave this open for you all as you think of it, as you think of barriers that really pop up. Just add them to this list here, because one, we're going to show at the end, once we learn through some of this information, we're going to look at how this framework will help us address all of our barriers that we have. And two, it's also a way for us as families, as educators, to network with one another. And so you might have a barrier there, and I could go on and add, oh, hey, I was experiencing that. And guess what? This will help as well. In addition to using the framework, here's a great idea. And so this will be twofold purposes. So we'll give about a minute or so for us just to go ahead and get our ideas rolling and just kind of brain dump them into this document here. But just know, if something pops up throughout, this is there. We're going to come back to it at the very end, so you still can add them as we go through. Okay, I see one, communication across the student's education team, especially in high school, when there are multiple teachers, no internet or Wi-Fi at home.
Woo, I love that one. That's a big one,
Yeah,
isn't it?
huge. Training is a barrier, both families and educators, to learn how to use the technology. You don't know what you don't know until you know it, right? That's been my motto as a mom. That's been my motto. Like, I didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. Same thing as an educator. And so that one's huge in my books as well.
Ooh, I love this one, Michelle. Generational barriers for native tech versus non-native tech learners. Ooh, so folks who maybe grew up using technology and maybe they're now supporting their students who who didn't use technology, who are now supporting kids who are using technology all the time. Wow.
These are great.
Ooh, parents are not provided AT training for school. Many times the device is used only at school. Yes. That's a barrier, right? Especially if it's communication system. We're taking that kid's voice and putting it up on the shelf until they get to school tomorrow.
All right, I'm going to drop in this link one more time, just in case. There we go. If you'll click on that link that is just dropped in the chat, it should pop it open.
This is so great. Oh, couldn't find it.
I also wanted to say I see a couple of them that are rural areas, and I grew up in a small farm town, and let me tell you, the Wi-Fi it was non-existent almost. So that is definitely a barrier as well, especially when there are so many students who require it, but then also so many educators who are also requiring it for classes and learning.
This is great. So as Michelle said, we're going to come back and revisit this. So just one tip, if you've got multiple barriers in your head, put one barrier per sticky. That'll help us with our activity later. All right. Are we moving on? Do I have this one, Michelle? I think I can just take it. Okay. So this is the what and the how. When Michelle and I were kind of putting the session together originally, it's really about, we were trying to kind of name this section, like, well, what is this? It's the what and the how. So we're going to work through the CITES framework, all those areas, and we're going to give you what should be happening and then how to make that happen. And in between each one of those areas, we're going to give you time to think about, are there things that districts that you know of or districts you're supporting or others are supporting that are doing great things in this area? So let's start with leadership. So the what, here's what should be happening. Districts should partner with families. District leaders should ensure that families and community members are partners in all phases of development and implementation. And they should also communicate with families in a way that's efficient, effective, and equitable. That's a big one there. So let's just take 10 seconds. Think about each one of these. And as district leaders that you know, how are they partnering with families to ensure that they're part of technology planning and that decision making? And how are they communicating effectively, efficiently, and equitably about some of those things? I know we saw some barriers earlier that would maybe tie in here, but are there districts doing these things well? Let's take a second. All right, Michelle, you want to do that?
Yeah, so what I love about this is that Maggie just shared, these are the practices, this is what they should be doing. And so when I think about any destination, we have to have actions. We have to have things that are going to guide us into making that become a reality. And so what I'm about to look at here and what you're seeing now are leadership actions to partner with families. So in order for those practices for partnering and communicating with families to happen, here are some things that research and evidence-based practices have proven to help you get there. The first thing is to partner with established family engagement networks. When Maggie was saying, hey, it's not just, one individual who's supposed to be a collaborative partner, it's many. And this is one way that as educators, as families, across the board we can establish that is by connecting to our engagement networks, our parent networks, seeking out training, supporting them, making sure that we're including their voices. Another thing would be that gathering of that feedback from families. And not a one and done, right? We want to make sure we're pulling in that feedback regularly. We want to make sure we're hearing the input that they're providing for us, and use those data, use that information to help us improve implementation. And then include families in the development and remote learning plans. I guarantee you, as a mom, I'm saying this as my mom hat, I guarantee you that every family member what's best for their kiddo. And so if you reach out, if you look at involving, if you teach them and you pull them in and say, hey, come and partner with us, give us some feedback, guiding the way is going to help them learn more about it so that they can contribute more as well.
Absolutely. And Michelle, as you were talking, these practices, I think it's really nice to say, these practices were developed with that frame of supporting students being served either on IEPs or 504s in mind. But these are just solid ways to engage families across the board. Really, all parents want to be part of this kind of decision making. I've lost track in our facilitation.
Yep. So that's okay. So here are those actions for communicating with families, right? We want guaranteed communications are, we want to make sure that every way that we're communicating with them, it's accessible. Not only accessible for those that we think that might need it, but accessible to the widest audience possible. Just like we don't necessarily know everybody's needs here within this webinar, we want to make sure that we're designing and we're communicating in a way that everybody can take and utilize the information. Same thing for our parents. Thinking about those barriers that were put into that Jamboard, right? We don't have Wi-Fi in our area, so we need to make sure that we're communicating in more than one way, more than just using that internet. Partnering with established family engagement networks. We want to allow extra time for family meetings when an attendee is non-English speaking to ensure complete understanding. And so making sure that we're considering our students' needs, but our family needs as well, and what we as a collaborative, coordinated team need in order to move forward together.
And so if you're thinking to yourself, boy, this addressed the barrier, the sticky that I put in that Jamboard, how can we make this happen? This feels like a lot. Talking back to those self-assessments that Christine was talking about, we don't have them available for today, but CITES website, those family engagement practices are going to be part of this entire packaged self-assessment across the CITES framework. So as we're talking about leadership, this is just going to be part of what districts have to talk about and think about if they're working through the CITES framework. Really powerful stuff. So let's hop into infrastructure.
Sure. And so, the greatest thing about infrastructure practices was we were actually working on the knowledge development of infrastructure and families at the same time. And through Angel's dissertation work is actually where we were able to develop, and we purposely had family practices included in the infrastructure section. We wanted it to be hyper-focused on what needs to happen with infrastructure decisions, and not to have, as already been mentioned, family considerations on the side. So the fact that the district technology leadership teams and the district teams need to provide families with access to the tools and subscriptions, of course, that's critical. We want to be able to be responsive and have timely access to the technology that's needed. And that we hear again and again, whether it's students not having access to accessible materials until October and school started in August, or a particular device is deemed too expensive or unavailable. And so that proactive planning and including the family so those decisions are made sooner rather than later. And the next slide, we, talk about the importance of communication. So how do we communicate with families? How do we provide information for them? specifics to the digital tools. One of our framework development districts out in California has a inclusive technology night, and they bring families together. So how are you showing folks how to use some of these tools? And then being sure that folks know how to get access to that information. So the fourth bullet here I'm skipping too is because that was mentioned in a lot of the stickies, right? Like families need training, families need to understand. It ends up that the districts let us know that oftentimes the teachers don't even know where to go to get the information. And so if the teachers can't figure it out, the families definitely need that level of support. So establishing a process is so critical. And then as with any technology tool, privacy and security are critical, and information needs to be provided to families so they feel comfortable providing their students access to the tools and resources. And then we think about that technical side, you need to have those families be a part of the feedback, including folks with disabilities in decision making so they can test out tools and resources, hosting those trainings, having a support desk. It all seems simple, but a lot of times the IT team may not be as familiar with accessibility features or assistive technology tools. And so your district or schools that students that you work with go to might have a help desk, but they don't have this part of the help desk that they really need to focus in on. And that's part of the goal here, is to bring everything together.
All right, so we've just learned some really great information. And throughout the session, we're going to ask you to really just reflect. And we think of it like a square or a circle, and just know that you can use the chat. I've also added a second page to our Jamboard. So on the Jamboard, if you at the top, it'll move you to the second page. And there is just a spot for, what's squared with your beliefs. So one thing that squares with your beliefs, and one thing that's still circling around in your mind about the family engagement practices and communication things that we just explored. For the sake of time, we're going to continue to keep on rolling, but just know that this is here, and feel free to just continue to add as we go through.
Thanks, Michelle. So let's hop into assessment, that great old can of worms. We're going to open it up because we've got a lot to consider when we talk about assessment. We've got statewide kind of large scale assessment, then we've got kind of more formative stuff that's happening in the classroom. Then we've got all the data that we have and that we collect using those assessments, and what are we going to do with it? So let's talk about how families can and maybe should be part of that process. So we've got two slides that really focus on the what districts should be doing. So the first two here, it's really about including families in large scale assessment administration. So we know each year during this month, we're going to be doing our statewide assessment, allowing families to kind of be partners in that assessment decision-making process. And the next one of the what districts should be doing is including families in accommodation decisions. Now, I know you're thinking, Maggie, they should be doing that anyway, but you all know, especially you all know, that sometimes just districts kind of make those decisions about what kids are going to have available on their assessments, and just kind of make the assumption that either parents understand or we're just going to make the decision because it's easier. And so parents really want to be part of those decisions and understand and know what's going on. So the third practice that districts should be doing or could be doing to better support families in that engagement process is really about using the data to inform decision-making around instructional, so individual instructional decision-making, transitional, so a student individually transitioning either from building to building, or within that transition process kind of as they're growing and moving on. But even if we take a step back, thinking about Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, taking a step back, talking about programmatic decisions. Okay, we've got this program in this building, and maybe we're going to get rid of that program and we're going to move these kids over there. Parents need to be part of that decision, right? But then systemic decisions. So how we're making systemic decisions at a district level about how kids are being supported with assessment and instruction. So that's the what. Let's get into the how. We're going to kind of zip through this here because we're running out of time. So the first one is really about that large scale assessment. And this is about including families of students with accessibility needs in large scale assessment, selection, implementation planning, and alternative options. So when we go into having conversations about how we're going to, what assessment a student is going to take, how they're going to be implemented with this particular student, but then also if this assessment doesn't meet the student where they're at, if there aren't the accessibility options for this particular student, maybe on a statewide universal screener, I know that's a big barrier, then what's the alternative? And I'm not talking alternate assessment, I'm talking alternative assessment. So having those conversations ahead of time, instead of when we get into the decision making and things are kind of happening. But then also sharing how large scale assessment data is used with families to really kind of establish a culture of continuous improvement. Like, hey, here's our data. What are we going to do in the future? So the next one really kind of narrows in on the student and really focuses on accommodation decision making. So the how here is providing families with information and training on available supports for both statewide and classroom universal tools. So what's going to be available on the test? Okay, good. Now what's going to be available during instruction? Because that's really the most important part. And then kind of start to make those accommodations and how are we going to have conversations about making sure that we know how to use those tools. But then also engaging families in the decision-making to identify and align those things. In most states, what's available for the statewide assessment is not the same as what's available perhaps, or a district assessment is not the same as what's available during an instructional opportunity. So allowing families to come to the table to have the conversation of, here's the text reader they're using every day. Here's the text reader they're going to be using on their assessment. How are we going to plan to make them familiar with the different tools and the features that they have available? It's an important conversation. Okay, and finally, thinking about including families in that instructional and transitional decision-making. This stuff should be happening, right? We're using data to inform decision-making. That's part of the IEP process. But what we know is that, Michelle, I'm putting your hat on here. I've learned so much from you, but when parents come to the table and they're sitting down with me on their SLP and I'm showing them these graphs about these, their progress monitoring, it's like I'm speaking a foreign language. And so it's really about taking the data and bringing it down to a level that's understandable, using plain language, using graphs that are relatable. So that's really what this one is about. But then also making that same consideration into when they're starting to use extra, getting to different activities and making sure that those decisions are infiltrating into other areas of their life. So the next part, and this is the one where when we've talked about this, people are like, oh, how do we do that? This is, I don't know about this. Up until this point, we usually get head nods and then it's like, this is about including families in those major programmatic changes that districts have to undertake and those major systemic decisions that are just part of the natural continuous improvement process. And what we know is that when families feel like they have say in some of these major changes that are going to impact their kids and their future and the trajectory that their kids are kind of working on, that they feel more at home with the district and more secure and being able to come to the table. So really it's just engaging them in those conversations. So let's get into teaching, Michelle.
Absolutely. So looking at these teaching and family engagement practices within the teaching, some of those practices that should be happening, the goal of it to be happening would be, one, engaging them in the learning community, which, educators consider families part of the learning community and engage in frequent direct communication with families. Once again, pull them in, reach out. Also reach out not only to have them connect with things, but a way to get them to want to do it more often is if they have constant communication with those involved in their child's education. Support families' shifting role. And so educators support the shifting role of parents in the learning process from parent advocate to student self-advocacy coach. This was hard. This was really hard for me because your kid, you're advocating for them, and then all of a sudden my kiddo, and y'all, I'm in the special education department. I knew it was coming, but it didn't hit me. Hey, you've got to pull your kiddo in for this IEP meeting, and they have to be able to verbalize, what it is that they need. We need help as parents in shifting that role because I continuously want to make those decisions. I want to make sure that the best decisions are being made. And sometimes as a mom, we like the control. And so districts in that partnership should help that shift. We want that shift to happen. And so looking at some of the actions that will help with this, help reach those goals, is to, one, engage in regular communication with families through means that are familiar to the parents. So text messages, emails, even notes home sometimes are the best way to communicate. Get to know families, cultural perspectives, and unique abilities to develop personalized and culturally relevant learning experience. Relevance matters. Knowing what our families prefer, knowing their cultural perspectives and making sure we're considering those, it matters. Use family volunteers to facilitate inclusive digital learning activities. Anytime decisions are being made, pull those families on in, making sure that we have the voices from many different perspectives. And then allow families to be part of that planning process to help inform classroom accommodations and supports. That's not only going to help us as educators really make sure that we have that symbiotic relationship, but it's also going to help in training parents as well. The more that we can pull them in, the more that we can make them a part. They're also learning how to make that consistency through school and home. And then actions to support the shifting role, encourage families to advocate for the learning supports for their learners require. Making sure you're teaching them and encouraging them to have conversations with your kiddo. Talk about what's working, what's not working. Help your student voice that. And then provide families and students with a variety of resources and training to guide that transition so that the students also feel comfortable in becoming a self-advocate, and the adults and the parents feel comfortable in being that coach. And then actions to include families in the learning process. Share what students learn in school through a class website, a parent portal. I can't tell you how many times I'm a mom of 4. I can't tell you how many times I ask, hey, what'd you learn today? What's going on? And they're like, nothing. Lunch, I ate lunch, and you're like, I really wish I was in the know. By sharing that information, by making sure that parents are included in that learning process, it's going to open up a world of, oh, hey, let's have this conversation at the dinner table. Provide families with talking points to discuss what students are learning in school. Giving them sentence stems to use. Hey, here are some things that you can ask your kiddo that won't result in a yes or no answer. Provide families with supplemental resources to take part in learning at home. What can I use that's not going to take all of my time as a mom because I got to split it between 4 people? What can I use at home to continue that support of the learning that's happening at school? And then, of course, host workshops for families to engage in learning with their students, making sure that it's relevant, making sure that it's appropriate, making sure that it's meaningful.
So Michelle, somehow we got the how and the what flipped around on our slides here. So this is actually, so Michelle just kind of went over the how. And so this is the what, and it's really everything that we've talked about here today is really coming down to this. This is that center part in Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. Everything is really impacting this right here, and it's about the learning. And so how can we help empower families to support student learning by involving them in the learning process, so that kids can continue learning outside of the four walls, right, of the classroom. And so Michelle went through all of those amazing hows, how to do that. Thank you, Michelle. We did get a really neat question, so I want to address it live. How can students who are nonverbal be included in the engagement? Wonderful question. So as a speech language pathologist, this is my jam, working with kids who don't have language yet. And so hopefully they're working with a speech language pathologist, number one, who's working on building some robust language options for that particular student. But number two, behavior is language. Behavior is communication. And so as we're having conversations, as you're watching and monitoring, you're going to know what kids like, and you're going to know what kids don't like. And it's just by the way that we're responding to certain situations. And so it's collecting data over time about how students are responding and reacting within those settings, or with certain people, or maybe it's certain food that they don't like. That's kind of, I always look and try to look at the student's body, facial expressions, how they're responding in that way, because students are responding and are using communication. It's just figuring out how. Would you have any information research on virtual speech therapy? Ooh, yes, I don't have it here today. Go ahead and email me for later. And we did have a question, I think, Christine, you answered it, about the self-assessments in virtual schools.
I did. Yeah, I put a link in there, and we just published a suite of resources in the fall. And over the next month, we'll be having more resources on students in virtual programs. And a lot of them are part-time. They're taking an extra class or taking credit recovery. And there's a lot of support opportunities there.
So Michelle, do you want to work through this one? Okay.
So, and actually, because we, if you'll pull up the Jamboard,
yes,
we'll combine these next few slides here. So right now, there's nothing that's still kind of circling around in your brain. We've answered some questions. We've also identified a lot of things that squared with our beliefs. So let's go back to the first page. And this is where we really kind of just shared some of those barriers that we're experiencing. We've gone through the framework piece, the parts of the framework. And I would encourage you, as you continue to explore the framework, continue to learn about it, if you were to go through all of these barriers, just like Maggie's kind of moving them around, you will identify that within the 5 components of the framework, they will address these barriers. There are supports embedded in them that will help reduce or remove these barriers, as long as we're considering them and we're pulling in that partnership to put them in place and to really think through some of those actions that we've identified. Maggie, do you want to tell us what you're doing right here?
Yeah, I sure will. So I'm just going through, and typically I would have stuck in the picture of the framework up here so we could see the teaching, learning, assessment, leadership, infrastructure, but we're running out of time, so I'm not going to do that. But I could go through, and almost every single sticky on here will align with the what and the how that the CITES framework practices around family engagement. If districts can work on that what by those hows, those actions, these barriers are going to be removed for families. And so this is really about supporting and coaching districts. Oh, thanks. Like, so there she is. So like all this internet stuff, I could throw that on infrastructure. I'm going to send this back. So rural technology, infrastructure, like, anyway, all these barriers can be alleviated by helping districts and coaching districts on implementing the CITES framework family engagement practices. It's really a powerful tool when we think about it. So that was a lot, and we've only got a couple minutes left. I'm going to go back this way. One thing we just want to end on, and then I'm going to toss it to Christine. So Joy Zabala was a colleague of ours at CAST. I call her the godmother of assistive technology. And this is really what it's all about when we think about that center of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. And she once said, I used to think I was passionate about assistive technology. What I've learned is that I'm very passionate about participation in learning. So it's not about the technology. This is about people's lives, living and learning, and the functions that have to do with that. And that is where the passion lies. And that's where our passion lies. And I know that's where your passion lies too, is with the learning, living and learning. And just if you know anybody who's an assistive technology professional in the field, there's a Joy Zabala Fellowship that's available. It's a mentor-mentee relationship. If they're looking to grow their skills, they could be a mentee. If they're looking to support and educate because they're a pro in the field, they could be a mentor. So please feel free to share this information with them. We'd love to have an application and get some folks on board that you all know in that Joy Zabala Fellowship. Christine?
Yes. So we'd love for you to continue the conversation with us. Again, if you have resources within one of your centers that you think would be valuable to the national audience, please feel free to share. I just reposted the doc, so you can add, make comments, add resources. You can also get all of our emails and access to the information. Our community of practice meets every other month, and we have a private Slack channel. So you want to post questions, ask, and we put resources out there. The best part is we do not email you. Really, we just send a calendar invite and hope you come to have dialogue. Our meetings are topic-based, but they are truly opportunities for discussion. So please join us there and follow at CAST_UDL, because you can see some of our work, but a variety of other work across CAST and different centers that can support what all of the great work you're doing. And I would say, I put in the chat earlier, thanks to many of you that supported our process and our research, and we look forward to continuing the partnership and sharing and learning. And we will definitely let Carolyn and Miriam know when the framework, the family engagement content has been all added across the site, as well as the self-assessment, so you can keep coming back. So thanks everyone, and thanks to Maggie and Michelle for putting this together. And this is our official disclaimer that nothing we said is a representative of the U.S. Department of Education. So have a great afternoon, and thanks for the energy. And I'm so glad so many people were active in the Jamboard and the chat. And thanks to the interpreters as well.